The Canadian government continues to prevent the UN Special Rapporteur on Indigenous Peoples from making an official visit to Canada. James Anaya, the Special Rapporteur, has said the federal government has ignored his request to visit Canada in order to investigate the human rights situation of the Indigenous people. Anaya has written to the federal government at least 3 times since February last year, requesting permission to visit the country. The government of Prime Minister Harper has been criticized for violating the rights of Indigenous people. We're going to cross over to Calgary now. Joining us via Skype is our correspondent Joshua Blakeney. Now, Joshua, it appears that the Harper government doesn't want the human rights violations against Aboriginals to come to light per se. Tell us a bit more about that.
Yes, it would seem so. I mean, Canada's whole foreign policy is based on spurious allegations that certain countries aren't opening up their countries to UN oversight and to international inspectors, and yet Canada itself appears to be giving the cold shoulder to the UN Special Rapporteur on the Rights of Indigenous Peoples, who wrote to the Harper government a year ago in February of 2012 to say, please may I have my official invitation so I can come and do my report on the state of Aboriginal affairs in Canada. And that invitation that is required, the prerequisite for him to come is to get this invitation, hasn't been issued by the Harper government. And so this individual, and which is quite ignominious for Canada, he's had to write a letter to different tribes, especially in British Columbia, to say, look, I'll make sure that if I don't get this invitation, that we'll arrange unofficial paths for us to meet perhaps outside Canada, who knows. And I think what's obvious is that the Harper government is basing its whole worldview on this idea that Canada is this utopian, perfect democracy that can go around the world lecturing other countries on how to shape their societies, when in fact inside Canada, inside the belly of the beast, there are a lot of human rights atrocities taking place. Of course, Press TV viewers will remember that just in February, Human Rights Watch published a damning report containing allegations that the police have been raping and abusing Aboriginal women. The UN Special Rapporteur on Food in just recent weeks has issued a report saying that Aboriginal people are malnourished. And a domestic prison watchdog in Canada, which was created by the government of Canada, has stated that some prisons in Canada contain 2/3 of the inmates which are Aboriginal. 2/3 of the prisoners in certain prisons in Canada are Aboriginal, and that Aboriginal peoples are disproportionately represented in Canada's prison system. And so there are numerous human rights violations taking place vis-a-vis Canada's Aboriginal peoples.
Right, Joshua, I'd like to pick up on that. We're quickly running out of time. But for those of our viewers who are not familiar with the situation of the Aboriginals in Canada, just walk us through exactly what the Canadian government is afraid is going to come to light if this UN rapporteur does come to Canada.
Well, as I've just adumbrated, there's been a series of reports by reputed human rights organizations recently, one of which was just published in February, contained allegations that the police have been raping Aboriginal women, taking Aboriginal women to private basements and sodomizing them. Now, this is a sort of thing that wouldn't be acceptable in the most despotic third world country, but this coming from a country like Canada, which purports to be one of the countries that has the right to lecture other countries on what democracy looks like. This is unbelievable. And so Canada is trying to portray itself, have an image of itself in the world as a kind of utopia. And what the UN Special Rapporteur threatens doing is exposing Canada's egregious human rights violations of its Aboriginal peoples. The Harper government, it has to be remembered, is very much in the pocket of resource companies and is in the process of restructuring Canada's laws that pertain to Aboriginal peoples in order to clear the way for the further plundering of the resources, especially in Western Canada. And the rights of Indigenous peoples that have been hard won are now being abrogated. Just yesterday, I was at a lecture by an Aboriginal lawyer who was listing all the laws that have been amended and changed under the Harper government. And it's quite clear that the Harper government prescribes to trickle-down economic theory, whereby you let corporations have their way, you move any obstacles like Indigenous peoples out the way, violate their human rights, violate their Aboriginal rights, and that way everyone benefits in their view. And the Aboriginal peoples have had enough, and they very much want the UN Special Rapporteur to visit Canada in order to illuminate the numerous human rights violations that are taking place towards Aboriginal Canadians.
Okay, our correspondent Joshua Blakeney, they're reporting from Calgary via Skype. Joshua, thank you for that input there. We're going to now move on to Arash to tell us a bit more about what he's got in store for us coming up in Sports International in a few minutes' time. Arash.
Thank you very much. Kenny's 8 teams battle it out for a place in the Europa League quarterfinals, and the Spurs somehow sneak through to the last 8 after a big win and a big loss. Find out the details when Sports News is on shortly.